Can fame protect you from the consequences of murder? Former NFL tight end Kevin Ware Jr. pleaded guilty to killing his girlfriend in 2021 and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. This is the shocking story of how a professional athlete thought his status could shield him from justice after committing an unthinkable crime. This is accused, and today we're diving deep into a case that proves fame means nothing when you cross the line into murder. But before we get into the horrific details of what Kevin Ware Jr. did to Taylor Pomaski, let's understand who this man was and how someone who once lived the American dream could fall so far. Kevin Ware Jr. was born on September 30, 1980, in San Diego, California. Like thousands of kids across America, Kevin dreamed of playing professional football. But unlike most who have that dream, Kevin actually had the talent to make it happen. His family moved to Texas when he was young, and Kevin played high school football at Klein Oak High School in Harris County, Texas. This is where Kevin first started to believe he was special, that he was destined for greatness. Kevin's high school career was impressive enough to earn him a scholarship to the University of Washington, one of the most prestigious football programs on the West Coast. Playing college football at Washington meant Kevin was competing against the best players in the country. The Pacific 10 Conference, now known as the Pac-12, has produced countless NFL stars. Kevin was holding his own against future professional players, and that gave him confidence that he could make it to the next level. The path from college football to the NFL is incredibly difficult. Every year, hundreds of college seniors declare for the NFL draft, but only about 250 players are actually selected across 7 rounds. Thousands more go undrafted and try to earn spots on teams as free agents. The odds are stacked against every player who dreams of making it to the professional level. Kevin Ware Jr. went undrafted in the 2003 NFL Draft. But that didn't stop him from pursuing his dream. On May 2, 2003, Kevin signed with the Washington Redskins as an undrafted free agent. This was his shot, his opportunity to prove he belonged in the NFL. But making an NFL roster as an undrafted player is incredibly challenging. Teams have no financial investment in these players, so they're often the first to be cut when roster spots get competitive. Kevin's journey with Washington was a roller coaster. He was waived on August 31st, signed to the practice squad on September 2nd, promoted to the active roster on September 12th, waived again on September 15th, signed back to the practice squad on September 17th, and promoted to the active roster again on September 19th. This constant movement between the practice squad and active roster shows just how precarious Kevin's position was in the NFL. Despite all the uncertainty, Kevin managed to play in 11 games for the Washington Redskins during the 2003 season. For an undrafted free agent, getting into 11 games is actually a significant achievement. Kevin was living his dream, catching passes from professional quarterbacks, playing in front of tens of thousands of fans, earning an NFL paycheck. After the 2003 season ended, Kevin found himself looking for a new team. In 2004, he signed with the San Francisco 49ers, another storied NFL franchise. Kevin played in 5 games for the 49ers during the 2004 season. Between his time with Washington and San Francisco, Kevin played a total of 16 NFL games and recorded 4 receptions for 26 yards. Now, those statistics might not seem impressive by NFL standards, but they represent something extraordinary. Kevin Ware Jr. had accomplished something that less than 1% of college football players ever achieve. He had made it to the NFL, played in real games, caught passes from professional quarterbacks, and earned his place in the most exclusive football league in the world. Kevin's professional football career effectively ended after the 2004 season. He signed with the Oakland Raiders in May 2005, but was cut the following month, ending his NFL dreams permanently. For most players, this would be a devastating blow. Going from the highest level of professional football to regular civilian life is a difficult transition that many former players struggle with, but Kevin's brief NFL career had given him something that would shape his thinking for the rest of his life, a sense that he was special, that he was different from regular people, that his status as a former professional athlete made him untouchable. This mindset would prove to be incredibly dangerous as Kevin's life began to spiral out of control in the years that followed. After his football career ended, Kevin settled back in the Houston area where he had played high school football. By 2020, he was 40 years old, nearly 2 decades removed from his playing days, but still carrying himself like his brief NFL career meant something. That's when he met Taylor Pomaski, and their relationship would ultimately cost Taylor her life. Taylor Pomaski was born and raised in Texas. At 29 years old, she was 11 years younger than Kevin, a vibrant young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Taylor was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed approximately 110 pounds. Those who knew her described her as outgoing and friendly, someone who lit up a room when she walked in. Taylor had previously been in a relationship with a man named Eric Zuliger before she began dating Kevin in the fall of 2020. Friends and family members would later say that Taylor seemed happy in the early stages of her relationship with Kevin. He presented himself as a former professional athlete, someone who had achieved success at the highest level of sports. For many people, dating a former NFL player would seem exciting and glamorous, but there were warning signs from the beginning that Kevin was not the stable, successful man he pretended to be. His football career had ended 15 years earlier, and, in the time since, Kevin's life had taken some dark turns. By the time he met Taylor, Kevin was already involved in illegal activities that would soon put both of them in danger. Kevin's criminal behavior began long before he met Taylor Pomaski. Court records and police reports paint a picture of someone whose life had been spiraling out of control for years. Kevin had been arrested multiple times on various charges, showing a pattern of escalating criminal behavior that should have been a red flag to anyone who got close to him. By early 2021, Kevin's criminal activities had reached a dangerous level. On April 19, 2021, Harris County Sheriff's deputies pulled Kevin over for reckless driving. But this wasn't just a simple speeding ticket. Kevin was driving 115 miles per hour, nearly twice the speed limit, driving like a man with nothing to lose and no regard for public safety. When deputies searched Kevin's vehicle during that traffic stop, what they found was shocking even for experienced law enforcement officers. Kevin was carrying a loaded AK-47 assault rifle in his car, along with other firearms and illegal drugs. Think about that for a moment. Kevin was driving over 100 miles per hour, with enough firepower to outfit a small army and enough drugs to indicate he was dealing at a significant level. Kevin Ware was charged with multiple felonies, including manufacture or delivery of a controlled substance and unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon. The fact that he was charged as a felon in possession means Kevin already had a criminal record that prohibited him from legally owning firearms. Yet here he was, driving around with multiple weapons and drugs, seemingly believing that his former NFL status would protect him from consequences. *A. Harris County judge set Kevin's bond at $23,000, which might seem reasonable for some defendants, but given Kevin's pattern of reckless behavior and the serious nature of the charges, this bond amount would prove to be a fatal mistake. Kevin was released from custody just 1 day after his arrest, free to continue the dangerous behavior that would soon escalate to murder. Being out on bond should have been a wake-up call for Kevin. Most people who find themselves facing serious felony charges would lay low, follow all the conditions of their release, and try to avoid any further contact with law enforcement. But Kevin wasn't most people. He had spent years believing that his brief NFL career made him special, that the rules didn't apply to him the same way they applied to everyone else. Just 6 days after being arrested for driving 115 miles per hour with an AK-47 and drugs in his car, Kevin decided to host a party at his home in Spring, Texas. This decision shows just how divorced from reality Kevin had become. He was facing serious felony charges, out on bond, and instead of maintaining a low profile, he was throwing parties and putting himself in situations where things could go wrong. April 25, 2021, was the night that changed everything. Taylor Pomaski was at Kevin's house for what was supposed to be a fun party with friends, but as the evening progressed, things took a dark turn that would cost Taylor her life and destroy Kevin's future forever. Multiple witnesses at the party reported seeing Kevin and Taylor get into a violent argument. This wasn't a private disagreement between a couple. This was a public display of aggression that made other party guests uncomfortable. Friends described seeing Kevin and Taylor engaged in a violent fight in front of everyone at the party. The details of that argument remain unclear. But what happened after the other guests left is a story of unimaginable brutality. Taylor Pomaski, who weighed only 110 pounds, was no match for Kevin Ware Jr., a former professional athlete who stood much larger and stronger than her. What Kevin did to Taylor that night represents one of the most horrific crimes you can imagine. If you're as shocked by these details as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button because this case gets even more disturbing from here. And you won't want to miss how justice finally caught up with Kevin Ware Jr. After the party guests left Kevin's house on April 25, 2021, Taylor Pomaski was never seen alive again. But Kevin's story to police was predictable and pathetic. He claimed that Taylor had simply left the party with other men, suggesting that she had chosen to go somewhere else and that he had no idea what happened to her. This story is classic deflection used by abusers and killers throughout history. Blame the victim, make it seem like they chose to disappear, paint them as unreliable or promiscuous, anything to shift attention away from the real perpetrator. Kevin thought his story would be believed because he was a former NFL player, and Taylor was just a regular woman who couldn't defend herself against his lies. But Taylor's family knew immediately that something was terribly wrong. Taylor wasn't the type of person to just disappear without a word. She had people who loved her, responsibilities she wouldn't abandon, a life she valued. Her father, Stephen Pomaski, told reporters that Taylor had been dating Kevin for almost a year, but her disappearance was completely out of character. The search for Taylor began immediately. Taylor's family contacted law enforcement, organized volunteer search parties, and reached out to local media for help spreading the word about her disappearance. Texas EquoSearch, a nonprofit organization that specializes in finding missing persons, joined the effort to locate Taylor. But while Taylor's family was desperately searching for her, Kevin's behavior during this period was telling. Instead of doing everything possible to help find the woman he claimed to love, instead of cooperating fully with investigators and volunteer searchers, Kevin continued his pattern of criminal behavior that showed he had no regard for the law or anyone else's safety. In June 2021, just 2 months after Taylor disappeared, Kevin was arrested again by U.S. Marshals. He was wanted for violating the conditions of his bond from the April weapons and drug charges. But how they caught him reveals even more about Kevin's mindset and his belief that he was above the law. Kevin was pulled over again for excessive speeding, driving over 115 miles per hour for the second time in 3 months. When law enforcement searched his vehicle, they found weapons and drugs again, showing that Kevin had learned absolutely nothing from his previous arrest, even while his girlfriend was missing, even while under investigation for her disappearance. Kevin couldn't stop the criminal behavior that was destroying his life. This second arrest resulted in Kevin's bond being revoked. The judge determined that Kevin was a danger to the community and ordered him held without bail. Kevin's pattern of reckless driving, weapons violations, drug charges, and bond violations painted a picture of someone who was completely out of control and had no respect for the law. The search for Taylor continued throughout the summer and fall of 2021. Volunteer searchers combed through wooded areas. Investigators followed up on tips and leads, and Taylor's family never gave up hope that she might be found alive. But as months passed without any sign of her, the likelihood of finding Taylor alive grew smaller and smaller. Then, in December 2021, 8 months after Taylor disappeared, investigators made a discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Human remains were found in a rural area of Harris County, Texas, and DNA testing would later confirm that these remains belonged to Taylor Pomaski. But the condition of Taylor's remains revealed something far more horrific than anyone had imagined. The level of violence that Kevin had inflicted on Taylor was shocking even to experienced homicide investigators who had worked hundreds of murder cases throughout their careers. According to court records, Kevin had killed Taylor by strangling, cutting, and beating her. The multiple methods of violence show that this wasn't a crime that happened in a moment of anger. This wasn't an accident or a fight that went too far. This was sustained, deliberate violence inflicted on someone who weighed only 110 pounds and had no way to defend herself against a much larger, stronger attacker. But Kevin's crimes didn't end with Taylor's murder. After killing her, Kevin attempted to destroy the evidence by setting fire to her body. The deliberate burning of Taylor's corpse shows a calculated attempt to cover up his crime and avoid accountability for what he had done. Think about the mindset required to do something like this. After strangling, cutting, and beating Taylor to death, Kevin then had to transport her body, set it on fire, and try to destroy all evidence of his crime. These aren't the actions of someone who killed in the heat of passion. These are the actions of someone who planned to get away with murder and thought he was smart enough to cover his tracks. Kevin's attempt to burn Taylor's body shows that he believed he could eliminate the evidence, tell his story about her leaving with other men, and move on with his life as if nothing had happened. He thought his status as a former NFL player would give him credibility with investigators. and that no one would question his version of events. But forensic science has advanced tremendously in recent decades, and even badly burned human remains can provide crucial evidence in murder cases. Despite Kevin's attempts to destroy the evidence, investigators were able to determine how Taylor had died and build a case that would eventually lead to his conviction. The discovery of Taylor's burned remains in December 2021 changed the entire investigation. What had been a missing person case became a homicide investigation, and Kevin Ware Jr. went from being a person of interest to being the prime suspect in Taylor's brutal murder. Prosecutors presented all the evidence to a Harris County grand jury, which is a group of citizens who review cases and determine whether there's enough evidence to formally charge someone with a crime. After reviewing witness testimony, forensic evidence, and Kevin's suspicious behavior after Taylor's disappearance, the grand jury determined that there was sufficient evidence to charge Kevin with murder. In July 2022, more than a year after Taylor's murder, Kevin Ware Jr. was formally indicted on charges of murder and tampering with evidence. The indictment meant that Kevin would face trial for Taylor's death, and if convicted, he could potentially spend the rest of his life in prison. But Kevin still had to face consequences for his other criminal activities. Remember, he had been arrested twice for weapons and drug charges, and he had violated his bond conditions multiple times. These charges were processed separately from the murder case, and they would result in additional prison time. In December 2022, Kevin accepted a plea deal for the weapons and drug charges. He pleaded guilty to manufacture or delivery of a controlled substance and unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon, receiving a sentence of 15 years in prison for these charges. This meant that even before facing trial for murder, Kevin was already looking at significant prison time. The 15-year sentence for weapons and drugs was just the beginning of Kevin's legal problems. He still faced the much more serious charges of murder and tampering with evidence, which could result in a life sentence if he was convicted at trial. Kevin's brief NFL career, those 16 games he had played nearly 2 decades earlier, meant absolutely nothing in the face of these serious criminal charges. As the murder case moved through the legal system, Kevin's defense team tried various strategies to avoid a conviction. They likely argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that other suspects hadn't been properly investigated, and that Kevin was being targeted because of his celebrity status. But the evidence against Kevin was overwhelming. Witness testimony about the violent fight at the party, Kevin's lies to police about Taylor leaving with other men, his pattern of criminal behavior, his violations of bond conditions while Taylor was missing, and the forensic evidence from Taylor's burned remains all pointed to Kevin as the killer. No reasonable jury was likely to acquit him given the strength of the evidence. Finally, in April 2023, nearly 2 years after Taylor's murder, Kevin Ware Jr. decided to accept responsibility for his crimes rather than face the possibility of life in prison at trial. On April 24, 2023, just days before jury selection was scheduled to begin, Kevin reached a plea agreement with prosecutors. Kevin Ware Jr. pleaded guilty to murder and tampering with evidence in the death of Taylor Pomaski. As part of his plea agreement, Kevin was sentenced to 30 years in prison for these charges. The sentence will run concurrently with his 15-year sentence for weapons and drugs, meaning he will serve 30 years total, 30 years in prison for Kevin Ware Jr. He is currently 44 years old, which means he will be 74 when he becomes eligible for release, assuming he lives that long and maintains good behavior in prison. His brief NFL career, those 4 catches for 26 yards that he was so proud of, meant absolutely nothing when it came to accountability for murder. The impact of Kevin's crimes on Taylor's family has been devastating and long-lasting. Taylor Pomaski's family has described the toll that her 2021 murder has taken on their lives. They've had to live with not just the loss of someone they loved, but the horrific details of how she died and the knowledge that her death was completely preventable. Taylor's family has had to endure years of legal proceedings, media attention, and constant reminders that their loved one's life was cut short by someone she trusted. They've had to relive the trauma of Taylor's disappearance and murder through depositions, court hearings, and news coverage of the case. No family should have to endure what Taylor's family has been through. The grief of losing a loved one is difficult enough under normal circumstances, but when that loss comes through violence, when it comes at the hands of someone who was supposed to care for them, the pain is magnified beyond measure. Taylor's family members have shown incredible strength throughout this ordeal. They never gave up searching for her when she disappeared. They cooperated with law enforcement throughout the investigation, and they've had to find ways to cope with the unimaginable loss of Taylor while also dealing with the legal system's slow pace toward justice. The case of Kevin Ware Jr. and Taylor Pomaski reveals something important about the psychology of people who think they're above the law. Kevin wasn't a superstar athlete. He wasn't Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, or any of the household names that most people think of when they hear NFL player. Kevin played 16 games over 2 seasons and had 4 career receptions. But Kevin carried himself like his minimal NFL experience gave him some kind of immunity from consequences. That arrogance, that belief that his brief taste of fame would protect him from accountability, may have contributed to Kevin's escalating pattern of criminal behavior that ultimately led to murder. Kevin's descent into criminality didn't happen overnight. It was a gradual process that likely began years before he met Taylor Pomaski. The weapons charges, drug dealing, reckless driving, and disregard for bond conditions all show someone who believed he was special, that the rules didn't apply to him the same way they applied to everyone else. This sense of entitlement and invincibility is dangerous in anyone, but it's particularly toxic when combined with the physical advantages that come with being a former professional athlete. Kevin was bigger and stronger than Taylor, and he used those physical advantages to inflict horrific violence on someone who trusted him and couldn't defend herself. The criminal justice system proved that Kevin's delusions about his own importance were completely wrong. His NFL career didn't protect him when he was arrested for weapons and drug charges. It didn't help him when he violated his bond conditions. It didn't save him when he was indicted for murder. And it certainly didn't prevent him from receiving a 30-year prison sentence for taking Taylor Pomaski's life. Kevin's fall from grace is complete and irreversible. From playing professional football in front of thousands of fans to spending the rest of his productive years in a prison cell. From being cheered and celebrated to being reviled by society. From having a future full of possibilities to having nothing but decades of incarceration ahead of him. But this case isn't really about Kevin Ware Jr. and his spectacular fall from grace. It's about Taylor Pomaski, a 29-year-old woman who deserved so much better than the fate that Kevin chose for her. Taylor was just starting her adult life when she met Kevin. She had no way of knowing that the man she was dating was capable of such horrific violence. Taylor trusted Kevin, and that trust cost her everything. She believed his stories about being a former professional athlete. She thought he was someone she could build a relationship with, and she had no idea that his sense of entitlement and his history of violence would ultimately lead to her death. Taylor Pomaski was 29 years old when Kevin Ware Jr. murdered her. She had potentially 5 or 6 decades of life stolen from her. Dreams that will never be fulfilled, relationships that will never develop, experiences she'll never have, contributions she'll never make to the world, children she'll never have, grandchildren she'll never meet. Kevin's 30-year prison sentence can never bring Taylor back, and it can never undo the trauma that her family has experienced. But it does ensure that this dangerous man cannot hurt anyone else. Kevin will spend the next 3 decades behind bars, removed from society, unable to inflict his violence and criminality on other innocent people. The case also highlights the warning signs that were present before Taylor's murder. Warning signs that unfortunately are common in domestic violence situations that escalate to homicide. Kevin's arrest for weapons and drugs just days before the murder. His pattern of reckless and violent behavior, his bond violations, his disregard for the law, and the violent fight that witnesses saw at the party were all red flags that something terrible was going to happen. For anyone watching who might recognize similar warning signs in their own life or the life of someone they care about, please don't ignore them. Domestic violence often escalates over time, and the presence of weapons, drug dealing, and other criminal behavior significantly increases the risk of lethal violence. If you or someone you know is in a relationship with someone who exhibits these warning signs, please reach out for help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they can provide resources and safety planning for people in dangerous situations. Kevin Ware Jr.'s story is ultimately a cautionary tale about how quickly a life can spiral out of control, how fame and status mean nothing when you choose violence over accountability, and how the justice system will eventually catch up with those who think they're above the law. Kevin thought his NFL background would protect him from consequences, but he was completely wrong. Taylor Pomaski deserved justice, and after nearly 4 years of legal proceedings, she finally received it. Her killer will spend the next 3 decades behind bars, and society will be safer with Kevin Ware Jr. locked away from the people he could harm. But justice, while important, can never truly restore what was lost when Kevin decided to take Taylor's life. The world is a poorer place without Taylor Pomaski in it, and her family will carry the pain of her loss for the rest of their lives. All we can do is remember Taylor for who she was, not how she died, and ensure that her story serves as a warning about the dangers of domestic violence and the deadly consequences that can result when people believe they're above the law. Next time on Accused, we'll explore another case where someone thought their status and connections would protect them from the consequences of their criminal actions. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it, and remember to hit that notification bell so you're alerted every time we release a new episode. Until then, remember that no amount of fame, money, status, or past achievements can shield you from accountability when you choose to hurt others. The law applies to everyone equally, and justice, while sometimes slow, is ultimately inevitable for those who commit serious crimes. Kevin Ware Jr. learned this lesson the hard way, but unfortunately, it came at the cost of an innocent woman's life.